Hello, my name is Darren Davidson, and I'm the CSU Extension Sustainable Landscape State Specialist. And I'm partnering and working with the City of Fort Collins to bring you some information about their ZIP program and how you can apply the basics of landscape design to your yard to create a xeric landscape. So first, I think it's important to think about, why do we want to be water wise? We can, simplify and sum it up by saying we just want to save water. It's the right thing to do. But if we really break it down, I think it can hit home a little more. So we live in a semi-arid environment. We don't have a ton of water here. So we want to be careful with how we use it. We are in a mostly urban area, certainly in Fort Collins, it's mostly urban. In the Western United States, approximately there's a range, but the high end is 60% of our municipal fresh water is being used on the landscape. And so that's water that could be used for cooking, bathing, drinking, and we're just dumping it outside. Along the Front Range, it's estimated that about 50% of our municipal fresh water is going to the landscape, and a lot of that is going to turf. If we're water-wise, we're just generally going to be able to use fewer resources and have a lighter footprint. Then we can also save money. We see this kind of thing all too often. This doesn't necessarily have to do with the type of landscape that we're looking at, but it's an important piece of how we can be water-wise, and that's understanding our irrigation systems. We don't want broken heads. We don't want overspray. We really want to have a tight system that looks at not only plant choice and landscape type, but also how we're using the water that we have. So the goal is really to find alternative uses for municipal fresh water. We don't want to see these drips. We don't want to see this waste happening. And by having a water-wise garden, you're helping the ecology of a site overall. So we're not just going for beautification, we're not just trying to save water, but we're really doing a multitude of things, and it's going to have an impact on you and your surroundings. And then, of course, you can save some money, which is always nice. It's important to remember that each site is a really key piece of this. So whether you're on a postage stamp lot or you have a large acreage and lots of landscape potential, all of these can play a part and have a really positive impact on water-wise plants, on using less water, on selecting the right plants that perhaps support pollinators and wildlife. So if we think about residential areas and schoolyards and parks and open spaces and all of these all working together, you can see how when it's all sort of knitted together thoughtfully, you're going to have that larger impact. So water-wise gardening is definitely a piece of sustainable landscape practices. So when we're talking about sustainability, it's generally the balance of three factors. So you can think of it either as planet, profit, and people, or social issues, environmental issues, and economic issues. And where those overlap and they're all being balanced, that's where we find sustainability. So we want to make sure in our landscape practices that we're taking into consideration the environment. So using less water, providing resources for wildlife. We want to make sure that it's not too expensive. We're not breaking the bank for ourselves, or if we're doing this at a larger commercial scale. And then we also want to look at the social benefits. So where do people play into this? What's the human health and well-being benefit? So again, if we can find that balance of all three, that's where we're hitting the mark on sustainability. So let's look at Xeriscape. This is the definition of Xeriscape. It is a style of landscape design requiring little or no irrigation used in arid regions. Now you can see I have a line through or other maintenance. It's important to know that every landscape is going to require some maintenance. We're working with living systems. They're dynamic. Things grow, things die, things need to be cut back. So we can design our landscapes to be on the lower end of maintenance, but it's important to know that it's never going to be no maintenance. So the term Xeriscape was coined in the 1980s by Denver Water, and it was sort of a campaign to bring awareness to people about what was going on outside. There were drought conditions, water shortages, and it really caught on, and they were really able to have a good impact. And here we are all these years later, still learning and still helping educate folks on how to use these Xeric principles. Now, another important thing is that Xeriscape does not mean zero-scaping. Some very well-intentioned people accidentally say zero-scaping and think that it's going to look like this, a yard of rocks and gravel. That is not what Xeriscaping is. This, in fact, is a Xeriscape. I'm going to show you a few examples and then we'll talk through more about what it is. This is a Xeriscape. This one, this one. So you can see there are some similarities and some differences. Here's a really gorgeous one. And this picture here is also Xeriscaped. So there are 7 principles of Xeriscape, and those are planning for water conservation. So we have water conservation in mind when we're doing any of our designs. We're looking at the soil and what's going on below ground, how the soil is working in the system. We're creating practical turf and non-turf areas. So Xeriscape does not mean zero turf, just as it doesn't mean all rocks. If we have an area where we're going to be using that turf, kids are out there, pets are out there, we enjoy being in that space, that's fine. We just want to be thoughtful about it. Irrigation efficiency is important. So that picture that I showed where the water was just running off the sidewalk into the gutter, that is not an efficient use of irrigation. Then, of course, we're selecting appropriate plants. We want to utilize mulch. Mulch can have a lot of benefits. It can help retain moisture as well as reduce weed pressure. And then we want to think about that maintenance piece. So I'll talk about this a little bit more, but we can create, depending on our goals for our landscape and our capacity, we want to sort of match those to the types of plants and landscape that we have so that we can keep up with the maintenance. So how do we get there? This picture on the left is a home in Denver, and that's the before. And then the picture on the right is the after. It's at a slightly different angle, but you can see it's the same photo. So all of that turf was replaced with really lovely xeric plants, providing lots of blooms. There you can see that picture. That's that far side of the driveway. So it's packed with plants. It's got lots of flowers. And you can see it's just in a typical neighborhood because you can look across the street there and over to the side. It's kind of your typical, urban or suburban neighborhood. You've got the home, you've got lawn, you've got a few trees and some shrubs. But these things can be created in these environments and in these neighborhoods. So in getting there and using some landscape design and beginning to understand landscape design, it's important to know what design is. Landscape design can be pretty intimidating for some people, understandably so. They might think, I'm not an artist, I don't know how to do this. But if you think about it as it's a process. You're making a plan, you're making some decisions about what you want to achieve with your landscape, and you're designating locations for these different elements to be appealing, to look attractive, to meet the goals that you have. So it might be creating an attractive landscape that attracts pollinators, or it might be an attractive landscape that doesn't use a whole lot of water, or it might be an attractive landscape with nothing but blue flowers. It's whatever you're after. And it could be a mix of all those things, but design, it's just a process. We're just going through and making decisions. And it's how we create our outdoor spaces. So plant choice, hardscape. So if we're having flagstone patios or walkways, then we're thinking about irrigation. Are we installing irrigation? Are we using the existing irrigation? And then you want to think about if you're doing this yourself or if you're hiring in a professional. And whichever the case may be, or maybe it's sort of a hybrid, you have some ideas, but you're going to bring somebody in, understanding the design process and kind of the steps and the thinking through that you need to go through for design is going to be really important. If you have kind of a grasp on that, you're going to have a much more productive conversation with that professional because you're going to be able to give them some parameters and some ideas and bounce ideas off of each other. And you'll get to that end goal a bit more quickly. So again, it's something that can definitely be taught. Yes, some people are more artistic than others, but it can absolutely be learned. You just need to have the tools and the strategies. So it's important to it's important to remember that we're working with dynamic systems. It's different than other static art forms. In this design arena, things are getting bigger, things are dying, needing to be replaced. I used to work at a botanic garden in Austin, Texas, as a horticulturist, and I had a volunteer who would always remind us that gardening is the slowest of the performing arts. And I really love that. We have to have grace and patience with ourselves in our process, but also with the garden, with the plants. We need to space our plants appropriately, even if when they're in little 4-inch pots, it looks really sparse. In a couple years, it's going to fill in and be really beautiful. So I think it's a good reminder. So again, to go through the design process, we need to kind of go through and systematically consider all of the different aspects of the land, of the environment in which we're in. Again, those growing and changing plants. Who are the users? Remember that people are really important. We're not just looking at plants. And then the overall ecology of the space. So I like to think of it as putting on your designer hat, your ecologist hat, horticulturist, entomologist, who are the critters that are visiting, and your homeowner hat. A great place to start is to look for inspiration. So you want to know what your likes and your dislikes are. You can peruse the internet, you might have magazines or books. One of the best things I think to do is to look at neighbors' yards. If there's somebody in your neighborhood or maybe across town and you really like what they've done, if you see them out there, then that's a great opportunity to stop and chat and ask them questions. Gardeners love to talk about their gardens. But maybe you can snap a few pictures or just get some ideas because, it's always helpful to kind of see it in real time. And through that process, after getting that inspiration, you want to kind of define your goals and objectives. So like, what style of garden are you going for? What are the uses going to be? Is it an outdoor play space? Are you looking for a really peaceful, tranquil sitting area? Do you need a pet dog area? Are you going to be hosting people outside? So just thinking through all of those. Then you're going to do a site inventory and an analysis. So that's really thinking through what is existing and how am I going to change it. You're going to think through the elements and principles of design. And that's what we're going to cover here in just a minute. And then you design. So going through these steps, and we're going to cover all of those in this lecture here, is going to help you on your way to creating that design and having a nice xeric landscape. So quickly, this is sort of the theory piece or the academic piece of landscape design. Of course, people take semesters and semesters of these sorts of things, and I'm trying to just break it down for kind of give you sort of the cliff notes. But I think it's important to at least understand some of these principles and elements that we see. So on the left is like a, what do you call it? Like a scroll kind of thing from ancient Egypt. And it's an early version and discovery of landscape design. There's a pond there in the middle. There are very clearly placed and chosen trees around the perimeter. We know that there are dates, olives, and pomegranates. So very clearly designed. Then in the middle there, we have a Renaissance garden where everything is just clipped within an inch of its life. And then on the right, we start to see more of what we see nowadays in our gardens, especially in Western gardens, a little more naturalistic, really full of plant life. And what's interesting, and the reason I show all three of these gardens through time, is that they all utilize these principles and elements of design. So principles are the fundamental concepts of composition. So principles are guidelines that we use to arrange different parts and pieces in our landscape. And then elements are arranged according to the design principles. Now, these are just things to keep in the back of your mind, not meant to be overwhelming, but we are going to go through each of these. So, of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but we do have these fundamental concepts of composition. So like I said, they're guidelines used to arrange. So the first one is order. Humans prefer order. It makes us feel calm, it makes us feel in control, and it can be achieved through balance. So if you see these two designs here, we have the red line in the middle, and the footprint of the house is the same, but the landscape is different. So on the top one, you've got lots of smaller plants, and then on the bottom, you have the same thing. The bottom half of the top picture, you have the same thing. So it's very symmetrical, very balanced. On the bottom image, it's not symmetrical. We have different features. The turf isn't divided equally. There are more trees with smaller plants down below, but there's more hardscape up top. But we still sort of achieve this sense of balance and order in that landscape. Unity links elements and features together. It creates harmony and consistency. Often it's accomplished through using a focal point somewhere in the landscape. Scale and proportion is an important one. Scale is an object size relative to another object. So in landscape design, we design for human scale. So we want to feel comfortable in the landscape, as we relate to the hardscapes and the plant material. This, I would argue, is out of scale for human scale. We have a heavy stone kind of monolithic house, slightly raised. It's up a little bit on a hill. And then we've got some very short shrubs around the foundation and a couple of trees. And then just turf grass, so right on the ground plane. So there's not a lot in between, and it doesn't really give a very comfortable scale. Same thing on this end. Everything is either really, really short, whether it's the little stump edging or the tiny plants. And then we see those palm trees, not a Colorado landscape, but we see those trees just shooting up, and we know that the canopy is way up high. Again, nothing in between. So you kind of want to have it graduated from short to medium to high. Next, we have repetition. So repetition of plant material, of hardscape material, of shapes. This is going to provide rhythm and a sequence to a space. So you can see here the stair-stepped, the terraced beds are repeated with the actual stone stairs that are over on the right side. The boulders are placed throughout the landscape. The plant material is repeated. So it kind of gives that nice rhythm to that space. Now, elements, these are visual descriptors of features. We have line, form, texture, color, smell, and sound. So in this really lovely vignette, I believe this landscape was designed by Laura Springer. We might just look at this and think like, wow, it's really pretty. There's that lovely pathway, a little water feature down in the bottom, and pretty flowers. Even in this small little vignette of a landscape, all of these elements can be found. So we're going to walk through what those are. Line is the first one. It directs our eye. So if you see the curve of the turf, the curve of the path, and the curve of the wall, for me, all of that is sort of like drawing my eye around the bend, and I wonder what's behind those red flowers down the path. If we look at this one, the eye is drawn toward the seating area and that fireplace. But then if you follow the line of pavers through the turf, you can see there's a hammock and a water feature and a much more calm space over there. And I think that if that line of pavers wasn't there, your eye just wouldn't even go over there. You would just focus on the seating area and the fireplace. Next, we have form. This is really the skeleton or the structure of a space. You can see this is, it's a rectangular back garden, but they've introduced all of these sweeping curvilinear lines. And so it's really providing that skeleton. We can also use plant material for form so that you can see these different types of trees have lots of great different forms, the columnar, the weeping, the pyramidal. So you can accomplish form through a lot of different means. Next, we have texture. So how coarse or fine a surface is. This is going to bring variety and interest. It's just going to make it fun to look at. You can see that image there. These are different vein patterns of different leaves. That provides texture. We can see the hardscape here, lots of different elements going on. So if we think back to some of our principles And if we think about repetition, you can see the wooden bench on the right. That wood material is repeated with the top section of that fence or that wall. It's that warm wood color. And those have a certain texture that is different than that concrete and the stone pavers and the stone wall of the house. So lots of different textures, but again, things that are repeated. You do want to be careful that you don't have too many textures. It can get a little overwhelming and kind of messy looking. So it depends on how large your space is, but you do want to be mindful of how many different textures you're introducing. Next, we have color. So color is really the fun stuff. When we go to the garden center, we're drawn to the different colors of flowers and think, oh, that's beautiful. I want that in my garden. And color is actually a really powerful element. We can really do a lot with it. It affects spatial perception. It affects light quality, balance. It can even affect emotion. There was a study done, I think in the 70s, that showed that most family fights happened in the kitchen. And it was during an era where most kitchens or a lot of kitchens were yellow. And yellow is kind of it's on the warmer end of the color spectrum, and it is sort of a, I don't know, kind of a feisty color, I guess. So just something to keep in mind. There's a whole color theory is a whole huge topic in and of itself. So again, warm colors are exciting. They're perceived as being closer. So if you have a huge space that just feels kind of, just really big, and you want it to feel a little more intimate, you might think about using materials and plants that have warmer colors, and it's going to make it feel a little more intimate and smaller. Cool colors are the opposite. So these are calming. They're perceived as being a bit farther away, and they can make a space feel larger. Now I'm going to put two colored shapes up on the screen. And I want you just to yourself to think, okay, notice which one is your eye sort of drawn to, which one kind of jumps out of the screen at you. So I can't know what you're thinking, but for most people, the red is where their eye is drawn. And that makes sense because it's just, it's that exciting. It's sort of, it's coming out at you. It makes the space, or it seems like it's closer to you. Now you can see that the blue shape is much larger than the red. If I make them the same size, to my eye, that red is just jumping out and the blue really is sort of recessed back. So just a little example to show you what I'm talking about. Like I said, color theory, it's a huge topic. It's a fun topic. If you want to dive into this, go for it. We're just going to scratch the surface a little bit. So when you're choosing colors, there are three palettes that people kind of stick to. One is monochromatic. We don't see this a ton, but we're all in the same color, but using different light values of that color. So like all greens, all reds, or all purples. So here's an example of a monochromatic landscape or garden bed. You can probably tell this is a pretty shady garden. We have hostas and ferns, and I think it's really attractive. There's a lot going on there, even though it's all green. But the reason it works for my eye is because of the texture. There are lots of different textures going on just in the shapes of the leaves. So if all of those different greens were the same leaf size and shape, it would just sort of it would look kind of homogeneous, even if we had some dark greens and some light greens. But all these different textures make it fun and interesting to look at. Next, we have analogous colors. So this is where you're using 3 to 5 colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. We see things like this, more sort of commercial plantings. I mean, some people in their yards could do this too. You just don't see it a ton. But you can see these are marigolds and then some coleus and a hosta in the middle. So we're going from orange to orange red to red. Those are analogous colors. And then what we see most often are complementary colors. So these are colors that are on opposite sides of the color wheel, blue and orange, red and green, blue and yellow, or excuse me, purple and yellow. They're complementary. They look really good to our eye. So this is often what we're using, and this is often what we see because it automatically looks good to us. So here's an example of that. So you've got these lovely purple shades of purple, and then that bright pop of yellow. So very complementary colors there. That said, this grouping of plants to me is it's a little blah. It's pretty, but it's a little blah. And I'll show you. Here's an example, same colors or similar colors anyway. We've got that pop of yellow on the left, we've got the purple on the right. Again, texture. We have different textures. So if I go back to this, all the same texture, different textures, much more exciting to look at. Now, I will admit there's that pop of orange in the background. That is helping things, but even if you cover that up, that yellow and that purple with the different textures are playing off each other really nicely. All right, now getting to smell. So smell is a really interesting element, and smell can be very nostalgic. I'll smell something and boom, it'll take me back to my childhood, to, a certain landscape or playing around in somebody's yard or something. So in this image here, I've got jasmine, lilacs, and roses, not necessarily waterwise, mind you, but just these are all really fragrant, really lovely smelling plants. So this is something you can play with if it's of interest to you. Now, I also did something here with the composition of those images. So you can be, these composition or these principles and elements of design can be applied in a lot of different ways. So yes, I'm showing images of plants that smell good as an example, but I also have complementary colors going, right? So it's just sort of a nice grouping of photos. White is neutral, and then we've got the yellow and the purple. And then finally, sound. So whether that's introduced wind chimes or perhaps a water feature that has a trickling sound, or it might be something like ornamental grasses rustling in the wind, in the breeze. Sound can be a really powerful element too. So just something to keep in mind as you're thinking through your design. So now we come back to this this picture here, this little vignette. Line, that pathway, it draws your eye toward that taller evergreen tree. And then to the right and on the other side of that pathway is, it looks like an aspen or something. That draws my eye to look up and look at the view. Look at those foothills there, which is pretty cool. Sometimes that's called a borrowed view. So it's sort of framing it. Form, we've got great form through the trees and the bench in the back and the boulders. Lots of texture going on. Good complementary colors, and then it might smell and sound lovely. So those are the elements. Okay, academic part done. So understanding that design is a process. We're just going through the steps, making decisions, thinking through things, and then kind of understanding the principles and elements of design, keeping it in the back of our heads. That's going to give us a great foundation and a great start to our next steps. So where do you begin? You've got all this in the back of your mind, you've got your space and your site, but what do you do next? Site analysis is the first step. You have to know what you're working with before you can really change anything. So, if you say, I really love these 5 plants and I want them right here and I'm going to plant them right there, if you don't understand your site, you might be putting sun-loving plants under deep shade. That's not going to work for you. So you want to go through, do a site analysis, figure out high spots, low spots, what kind of exposure you have. You want to understand your soil. Go through and think about all these different things. And it's important to sketch it out. So, here we have this is a landscape designer did this, so yours doesn't have to look like this. But you can see that the arrows are showing high spots and low spots. So that's where water is flowing. That's important to keep in mind when we get precipitation. That might determine where you put more xeric plants, more water-loving plants. Maybe you're going to include a rain garden. You want to put a rain garden where water naturally sort of settles anyway, kind of work with that rather than against it. And then we want to be thinking about sunny spots and shady spots. This is going to determine a lot about our uses, how we're using the space, and then also our plant choices. So if we think I want this patio right here, it works really well for visually. You put the patio in and you realize, holy moly, all summer long it is baking hot and we never go out there or we have to build another structure or have umbrellas or something. If you'd taken a few moments to kind of look at the sun patterns throughout the day, pay attention to existing trees, that sort of thing, then you might save yourself some headache. Now, one thing that I really like to point out is thinking through the user's experience and your design. So you see this image here, we see this kind of thing all the time. The designers said, we want people to walk right here on this path, but people and pets, we're going to take the shortest route from A to B. And we get these cow paths, sometimes people call them, where we're wearing down the turf, but it's quicker for us, so we're going to do that. And the design is just kind of like left sitting there, unused. So really think through that. Here's another example. This is Montana State University, and they did a really unique thing. You can see the sidewalks at kind of funny angles, right? There's some wide sidewalks, some narrow sidewalks. What they did, they were getting all these cow paths through these turf areas. And so what they did was, after several snowstorms, the landscape architects went up on the roofs of these buildings and watched where faculty, staff, and students walked when they didn't have a sidewalk sort of dictating where they should go. They did this over the course of several storms, and they were almost always exactly in the same spot. So that's where they put those walking paths. So remembering the users and the people or pets that are going to be moving through the space is super important. We don't want to put something just because it's going to look good or just because we want it there and then realize, oh man, if this was 5 feet to the left, it would have really worked better. So just one of those things, again, to keep in the back of your mind. Location, location, location. So where are we doing this work? Do we have sun? Do we have shade? What is our objective? Are we trying to attract pollinators? If so, the larger the space, the better. And by larger, I'm not saying you have to have a big yard to do this, but the more of your yard that you can convert into waterwise and pollinator habitat is going to be better. The more connected, the better is really going to be good for pollinators. Can you connect your front yard, your backyard? Can you work with your neighbors? Maybe talk them into doing this sort of landscaping, share your ideas, kind of get on board with each other, and you're expanding that waterwise habitat landscape. So with all of this, it's super important to put pencil to paper. Some people go right in with pen, but pencil's a good idea in case you want to erase. But it's going to save yourself time and money. If you can take the ideas in your head and actually transfer them onto paper, again, these are just for you. You don't have to show anybody. It just has to make sense to you. If you can do that process and try different iterations, put the patio over here and this garden bed over there, and then swap them, or put the dog run here and the veggie garden here and the xeric garden there, and then switch them around. Having different iterations is going to sort of open things up and help you see and help you understand how it's going to work best for you. So again, creating different draft designs with different ideas based on your site analysis. So you're not going to just do this from nothing. You're first going to do that site analysis, pay attention to what you already have existing, and then let that kind of determine where you're putting different things. So then your final design is going to be, you're going to have potentially some hardscape materials. You're going to have your planting areas. You're not necessarily getting to what plants yet. First, you're defining where you're going to plant things. You might say, this will be a xeric garden, this will be a veggie garden. But the plant choices are going to come next. They're going to come later. And then your irrigation system. Got to pay attention to that. Are you installing a new one? Are you working with what you have? Are you totally going to cut off the irrigation? That sort of thing. Super important. And if you're not doing a whole big landscape design, you might just be doing a little corner. You might just be doing a planting bed. You can still do this on a small scale. You still need to know where the sun is, where the water flows, who's going to be using the area. So this applies for small adjustments in a landscape in a yard, and it also applies to if you're doing a whole big redesign. So I said it's really important to put that pencil to paper. And I literally mean just put pencil to paper. It's a great way to warm up. I have a degree in landscape architecture, and even for students who want to be landscape architects, one of the trickiest things is just like knowing it's okay to mess up, that you can try again and kind of be loose about what you're doing. So just do some scratches, do some doodles, do some squiggles. If you can take 1 minute, just draw some lines toward you, away from you, left, right, get some spirals going on. You want to just kind of loosen up before you actually start doing that pencil to paper thing. And I think it'll bring some confidence, because sometimes just that first line can be the hardest line. Okay, so now what? We've got some theory, we've got the principles and elements, we know we need to do the site analysis, but then what's our next step, right? So hopefully throughout all of this, you kind of are having a sense of what kind of landscape you want. There are so many different things you can do. And you know, sometimes people get inspired by a particular plant or a style, and you're just sort of bringing all of these pieces together. So looking at what garden styles are appropriate for Colorado, especially when we're talking about waterwise landscapes and xeric landscapes. So those can be wildlife habitats. Again, strictly looking at xeric and waterwise. Rock gardens are really appropriate here. Rain gardens can work really well. All of those things can work together. You can have all of those in a single garden. Um, you know, the English cottage country garden, maybe not the best choice. The large, expansive, you know, estate turf with hedges and topiary, you can do that here. Not perhaps the best choice, though. So just thinking through, you know, what do we want to do? How do we want to celebrate where we are in Colorado? So again, some examples. This is a xeric garden, a Xeriscape, a Coloradoscape. Yes, there's some turf in there. Hopefully they're using that turf. But the plant choices that they've used, not a lot of irrigation is having to go to the perennials and annuals there in the front corner. Here are some rock garden pictures. This is a native plant garden that is in its sort of infancy, so the plants are kind of small. Pollinator gardens. There's a lovely bumblebee, queen bumblebee, getting some nectar resources. So whatever your objectives are with your landscape, you just want to keep in mind where we are. We're in Colorado. We're in the semi-arid desert. We're near the Rocky Mountains. We're near the plains, you know, bringing all of those pieces together. So there's this concept called genius loci, and it translates to the spirit of place, or a location's distinctive atmosphere. Landscape architects and designers think about this a lot. So Lady Bird Johnson, who started the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, she has a quote that is, "Wherever I go in America, I like it when the land speaks its own language in its own regional accent. Texas should look like Texas, and I'll say Colorado like Colorado." So again, it's celebrating that sense of place, celebrating the flora that is here. You know, lots of people move to Colorado because of the beauty, because of the mountains. Let's capture that. Let's highlight that. Let's not try to make it look like somewhere else. If we kind of have that framework and that lens, we're probably going to be moving more toward waterwise landscapes anyway. So applying those elements and principles along with our site analysis. So we go back to that site analysis, we think about what we have, and then, you know, we're creating an abstraction of nature. We want to think about our plant palette. It can be naturalistic, it can be more formal, it can be water intensive or not. Certainly, we're wanting to steer more towards waterwise. Then we have lawn alternatives. So there's a lot of discussion about how much lawn to have and taking out lawn. You can convert your lawn to totally shrubs and trees and perennials and grasses, like ornamental grasses, or you can have a native plant, native turf using buffalo grass or blue grama. You can also just consider shrinking that turf area. You can convert your lawn to flagstone patios. Some people totally do away with it and have some hardscape, so you can still use it, kind of walk through that space or have chairs or tables on that space, maybe with flagstone. Make sure you do dry lay that. So don't have it like grouted or mortared in. So if you set it with sand, then water and moisture can go through those cracks and into the ground. And plants can grow in those areas. So that's some creeping thyme, but we also have pussy toes is a native plant that's really good and will kind of fill in cracks like that. So lots of options there for shrinking that turf footprint. Okay, now we're going to get into the plants. So plants are fun. Plants are typically why gardeners like to garden. So a few things you want to think about when you're thinking about plants, and that is seasonal interest. So you can see those images there are 4 seasons going clockwise: spring, summer, fall, and winter. Really pretty. There's something going on all seasons. I think that all year round, our gardens can provide interest and beauty. We want to think about an extended bloom time. Again, that's for those pollinators. We want plants that bloom as early in the spring as possible and as late in the season as possible and all the way through so that they have those resources they need. It's also more attractive for us. We want to think about the colors, the texture, what is the exposure, sun, shade, size of plants, function. What do we want our plants to do? They can work for us. It's not just about aesthetics. Maybe we want to block noise. Maybe we live on a busy street. Maybe we want to screen our neighbor's yard, or screen out the billboard that's, you can see right from your yard. You can do a lot of different things with plants. We want to think about that structure of the plants. Of course, we want to think about the maintenance. How much time do we have to give towards maintenance? If we can just putter around in our garden, every day a little bit, it can be higher maintenance. If we only have an hour or 2 on the weekends, then we're going to want to pick plants like ornamental grasses and shrubs that don't take as much maintenance. And then, of course, we're thinking about the water needs of the plants. Again, how do we choose these plants? We want to look at xeric. We're trying to be water wise. Those 4 seasons of interest, so key. We want to think about color combinations. Complementary is usually the easiest to go. It doesn't sound quite possible to me for some reason, but plants can clash. You can have 2 colors next to each other that do not look good. So think about your color choices. Again, let's have that long bloom time for pollinators and have a variety of heights, bloom shapes, and structures. So you can see the black-eyed Susan there with the sort of typical sunflower family flower structure. And then we've got a penstemon there on the bottom, totally different flower structure. So these colors are complementary and we have different texture and bloom types going on there. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Remember that things grow. We need to space plants appropriately. Don't put plants too close together. Don't put plants too close to other objects, too close to the house, the driveway, the power lines. Really be thoughtful in where you place plants. Here's an example of some grasses that have to be sheared. So if you look toward the right middle of the picture, you can see the grasses are spilling all the way over. They're just doing what they do. They've got their attractive seed heads. They're looking good, but it's hanging over and making that sidewalk too narrow. And so people have to go through and just chop them back, and then they don't look good. Same thing with this funny little shrub. Has to be trimmed in because of the sidewalk and where people park on the street. And then it's only able to bloom on the top there. I always look at this picture and think if somebody stuck some googly eyes on there, it would look like a little person with some wild hair. Resource Central, they do Gardens in a Box, and they have this great graphic that I like to borrow. So it's showing the first year what it's going to look like planted. Again, might not be terribly satisfying for you. Everything's kind of spaced apart. But if you look at the second year and the third year, boom, super full, super pretty. Again, gardening is the slowest of the performing arts. Then we want to think about irrigation. So irrigation is less fun than plants, and I'm going to get into some plant lists. I'm going to go through some actual varieties. But irrigation is so important. We have to think about it. So I'm not going to go through every single thing here, but just read the chart, kind of think it through. We've got rotors, spray heads, drip, different kinds of irrigation. We have to figure out what's most appropriate for our plant palette. If we have turf, we're going to use something different than if we have dense shrubs or perennials and annuals. That's going to be more of the drip irrigation or hand irrigation. And then the run time. How much are we actually applying? A lot of people actually overwater their turf. So they're dumping way too much water on there because they think they need to. So really starting to understand what we actually need to be putting down and how frequently. We see things like this all the time. This is incorrect spray pattern. So somebody might look at that and think, oh, weird, what are those? Why are there patches of dark green and then patches of what look dead? It's probably just dormant, and it's simply because the sprinklers are not getting water to those other parts of the turf, and so it doesn't look good. That's it. It's just not getting the water it needs. So again, we're talking about waterwise garden. You probably don't have these big open areas of turf, but just to show how important irrigation is, even if we have very xeric gardens, there's going to be an establishment period. We're going to need to be able to get water to these plants sometimes, and we want to make sure that it's functioning appropriate, or it's functioning efficiently and appropriately. So again, there's that question of drip versus sprinkler. No matter what kind of irrigation system you have, it has to be adjusted. So we see things like this image here all the time, where that irrigation, that tube that's wrapping tightly around that tree was installed when that tree was small, right? When the tree was installed, the irrigation was installed, and it probably was never adjusted. So whether you've got drip or rotors or whatever, you've got to be thinking about your irrigation system and adjusting it accordingly. Irrigation systems are not set it and forget it. And speaking of trees, if you're doing a renovation in your landscape and you're really trying to cut back on water as much as possible, you want to go super xeric. If you have a tree in the mix, you can't forget about it. So that tree is still going to need water. It's going to need more water, like deeper irrigation waterings than your xeric landscape is going to. So you can't cut everything back. If you do cut your entire irrigation system back to match your xeric, shrubs, perennials, annuals, then maybe that means you're hand watering your tree. But we don't want to see our urban canopy and our trees dying because we're forgetting about them in our xeric transitions. So just something to keep in mind. Hydrozones is another thing to keep in mind, another tool that can be used. And this is irrigation done by area, not by plant. So you're going to group plants with similar water needs together rather than just by these look good together for my design. And so that's what I'm going to do. But if one is super xeric and one is a little more water, a little more thirsty, you're not going to be able to set your irrigation to meet both of their needs. So you're watering according to plants' needs. It's going to be more efficient, going to generally use less water. I will say you don't have to forego water-loving favorites. Some people have plants that they just absolutely love, and you can have those. Just, maybe pared down, don't have too many. And it's a good idea to plant those closer to the house because you're going to see them more frequently and you're going to notice, oh, they need a little extra water. I can get to them. And then you can enjoy them more. So hydrozones, it doesn't actually have to be in concentric circles like this, but just sort of think about, more water loving close, more xeric can be sort of further away. But again, you're grouping those plants together. So if we have a very low hydrozone, probably going to be a native plant or a regionally adapted plant. you might only have to water once or maybe twice a season. If it's a low water use hydrozone, again, probably native or regionally adapted, you might be watering 1 to 2 times a month. And then you can see a high water use hydrozone, you're going to be watering that weekly, maybe even a couple times a week. When we're thinking about removing turf and where we're going to sort of fit in some of these new waterwise landscapes, it's a good idea to start where it's hard to mow. It's hard to maintain that turf. So maybe a sloping yard or kind of a funny patch that doesn't make sense to have turf. You can start small and from the edges and kind of work in. You can see this landscape here where you can, on the left, you can see all the upturned dirt. There's their xeric landscape that they redid. So you can kind of take out little bite-sized pieces. Again, these all show where there's some turf and they're just kind of slowly taking out some of that turf and creating new garden beds. So I'm going to quickly touch on some landscape plan best practices. So we want to draw our landscape plans to scale. What does that mean? Basically, what it means is we're taking our measurements outside. So for that site analysis and for our different design iterations that we're sketching out, we need to know how wide is our yard, how deep, how far apart are these existing trees. So we're taking these measurements outside and then we're drawing them smaller in a smaller dimension on paper. So we're drawing them to scale. We don't want to just estimate, it's about this far apart, but I don't really know what that means. Most landscape plans are drawn at a 1 to 10 scale. That's going to mean 1 inch on our paper equals 10 feet. So using something like graph paper can be really helpful. And that's going to help you determine as you're putting in new, on paper, you're designing in new beds or new hardscapes, you can know, oh, I've got 10 feet by 20 feet to work with here. So you want to think about drawing to scale. It's also a good idea to include a date, know when you're thinking through this, when you're working on it, and a north arrow. It's really good to help orient yourself. That's going to help with the site analysis. If you're looking at your landscape plan and you know this way is north, you can kind of think through what the sun patterns are going to be, where your house is going to cast shade, that kind of thing. Again, you want to locate new landscape ideas and old landscape materials. You want to draw everything in. Plants, always drawn to their mature size, super important, so we're not cramming too many things in. We want to draw in where we have edging, where we're going to put mulch, where we might be putting pavers, and then also including a legend that lists out the plants that we're using. So I have a few examples here. You can see top circle showing the north arrow, circle all the way to the left showing the legend. And again, you might not be able to see this person's or read this person's handwriting, but they can, and that's what's important. And then you see on that the left image, but sort of the middle circle, they've got their scale. So they can remember 1 inch equals 8 feet. And you can adjust that scale to whatever makes sense to you. Then we've got this, it's the same landscape, same person with the image on the right, same scale in the circle that's all the way to the right, 1 inch equals 8 feet, but this is their planting plan. So you can see all the circles with the numbers in them. They can correspond that number to their plant list and know what plant they're putting where. Here's another example. Again, they've got their location, their scale, 1 inch equals 10 feet. They've got their north arrow. They've got their planting plan. They've got the legend where they're showing this is flagstone, this is a dry creek bed, this is where I have wood mulch. Here's another one, more computer graphics. So you can use whatever you need to accomplish what you're trying to get across and what you're trying to design. And here's another one. This is more of a professional design. Again, has the legend, has the date, has the scale, has the north arrow. A little design trick, sort of a tip and a trick. When we're moving into more xeric landscapes, people think, again, they have that mentality of, okay, it's going to be lots of rock mulch and a few plants. We still want to have a similar planting density. It's just we're looking at a different plant palette. So, but if we do want to kind of take up more space but not have huge expanses of rock, shrubs are really awesome. They grow quickly, they take up space, they can help suppress weeds, they're low maintenance. They're going to be relatively inexpensive per square foot as compared to ornamental grasses and perennials. So don't forget about your shrubs. It's just a little plug for shrubs. And then our mulch. Pea gravel or squeegee is going to be a good choice. And again, we're going to plant close enough to avoid that heat island effect where we have the gravel just really absorbing a lot of heat, but not so close that things are getting crowded out. If you want some design ideas and inspiration, if you check out Plant Select, they have some pre-made designs that you can either use or just kind of get some ideas what plants work well together and look good together and have similar water use. And then the Colorado Native Plant Society on their website has the Low Water Native Plants for Colorado Gardens little booklets. Those were created in partnership with several other organizations. You can also find these on the CSU Extension fact sheet publications page. But the state was divided into 5 different regions, and there are landscape designs in there. So again, you can see the plants, the number of plants, what those plants look like. So lots of different options there. Sometimes it's nice to do that for some inspiration. And now we're just gonna start going through some plants. And luckily you can pause this and look at the pictures and write down the names if you're liking how they look. Here's some dry shade plants. A lot of people look for dry shade. That can be a tough one. But here's a great variety of some native, some regionally adapted. There's some ground covers and some grasses. And now I'm going to go through some individuals that are really good and really available. So almost all of these, or maybe all of these, are native plants. One thing with native plants is that they can be a little hard to source, to find. So everything I'm going to share here, and I'm going to move through these kind of quickly, knowing that you can pause and write down names and then do some Google searches later. All of these should be available in the trade. So New Mexico privet, if they want sort of a clump of aspen, but it's too dry, but they want that kind of feel or that look, this is a great one. Gets pretty fall color, gets those berries. Saskatoon serviceberry, really great one. It produces berries, again, great for wildlife, gets really pretty white flowers, and then is a nice, pretty large shrub. Sort of a small multi-trunk tree, large shrub. Really pretty flowers. Golden currant is fantastic. Gets bright yellow flowers early in the spring, has a nice clove scent, also produces those berries, those currants. Western sand cherry. This is one that's been in the trade for a long time, especially that Pawnee Butte sand cherry. It kind of has a nice, it's not an upright habit. You can see it sort of, the Pawnee Buttes kind of is trailing, but it has a nice structure to it. And both of these species do really well here. Red osier dogwood, great red stems, looks awesome against, after a snowstorm against that white snow, and fills in nicely during the season, has nice big leaves, gets these white berries. Lead plant, or Amorpha, there are different species. Amorpha is the genus. I like this one because it gets these purple spikes and bright orange pollen. Again, those complementary colors, has nice texture. There are large ones that are like, they'll get like 4 to 5 feet tall and across. There are also dwarf varieties that are a bit smaller. They're legumes, they're gonna fix nitrogen, which is great. This is a good one in place of Russian sage. Here are some grasses, Bouteloua gracilis. Blonde Ambition is what I have in the picture. That's a cultivar of the straight species, but they have really pretty seed heads, whether you're using the straight species, which is much smaller, or Blonde Ambition that gets pretty big. Little blue stem, really pretty bluish, gray, green growth in the spring, has some nice fall color, turns kind of a rusty red, gets pretty seed heads. Colorado or desert 4 o'clock. This is one that does not look to me like it would be water thrifty. It looks like it would need some extra water, but once it's established, it is very xeric, and it'll be covered with these pretty kind of bell trumpet shaped flowers all for much of the summer. Prairie coneflower is a great one, comes in yellow and red, and then you can see in the middle sort of yellow and red. And I will note the image on the right in the front there, that purple one, that's purple prairie clover, another fantastic xeric native plant. Penstemon, we've got lots of different penstemons in Colorado, which is awesome. Pollinators love them. They come in short and tall and red and purple and blue and pink. So lots of good penstemon choices. Chocolate flower, Berlandiera lyrata is a great one. It actually smells like chocolate, especially when it's been warmed up by the sun a little bit. I think it smells specifically like a Hershey's chocolate bar, a Hershey's milk chocolate bar, not dark chocolate, milk chocolate. Tough as nails, covered in yellow flowers all summer long, super xeric. Wine cups, these ones kind of trail. They can take up sort of a lot of space. They're going to have a taproot, but then they kind of trail out. Looks nice spilling over a wall, covered in these magenta flowers. And now just some design inspiration, just giving you some eye candy to kind of wrap things up. Here in this image, we've got lots of different penstemon in light pink and darker pink. There's even some purple in there. That yellow in the foreground is Callilophus, is a primrose. In this one, we've got Penstemon pinifolius, that orange, the bright or the kind of yellow in the left front is Eriogonum umbulatum. That's yellow, or that's sulfur flower. That's a great one. The leaves turn kind of magenta in the fall, which brings some of that fall and winter interest. We've got Gaillardia in there, Aristata blanket flower, and then that pop that's sort of pinky green in the front there, that's a non-native hop flower or oregano, but it's really pretty. It's regionally adapted. This one is another great xeric. All of these are xeric. We've got rabbit brush in the front. You can see those magenta flowers are that wine cup kind of, meandering through the garden. There's kinnikinick, there's yucca, there's prairie, purple coneflower, or sorry, wine cup, prairie wine cups. So lots of different things going on there. Again, just giving your eyes something to kind of rest on, get some inspiration, think about plant combinations that you might like. That's prairie coneflower there, the pink larger ones, and the yellow are the prairie coneflower. And then all of the little white are Erigeron or fleabane daisy. Those yellow and red are blanket flower. The purple is penstemon. Got some yucca, and then again, you've got that Erigeron, those little tiny daisies. And here's more of a cactus and succulent garden. So this is more of that rock garden look. The bright pink, that is Delosperma, or ice plant, not native. Some people love these, some people hate them. They get covered with flowers and are really pretty. So they definitely do well and don't take a lot of water. We got some more. We've got agave, and we've got dwarf rabbit brush. We've got pine leaf penstemon. Goldenrod there on the left, in the middle left. Goldenrod is a great late season bloomer. Artemisia frigida, fringed sage there on the bottom left. It's great to have some sort of filler plants that aren't necessarily blooming too, but they're using up space and they're providing texture and different things to look at. Ephedra in the middle there, and then in the back, sort of behind that ephedra, is fernbush. Fernbush is an excellent plant, native shrub. Love that one. I'd love to see more of that used. So, okay, those are some fun plant pictures to look at. Now, if you're going through this and you think, whew, sounds like a lot of work, I want to hire a professional. or maybe that was your plan to begin with. As I said in the beginning, I think it's still important to understand all of these concepts and think through all of these things. It's really important to land on your likes and your dislikes. It's a good idea to interview different designers. You want to know if they're willing to work with you, or if you want to sort of, or they want you to kind of give an overview of your wants, and then they run with it. You got to figure out the right person to work with for you. You want to make sure that your style and general aesthetics kind of match up with them. Often you can find, if you're researching them online, they'll have photos and sort of a portfolio of their work. It's a great way to figure out if they'd be a good match for you. Also good to figure out if they have specialty areas. Maybe you want to go fully native. Not all landscape designers, landscape architects are going to do that. So you want to make sure you understand. Maybe you don't necessarily want all natives, but you know you want all Xeriscape. Well, you want to make sure that you're working with somebody that understands those principles and can do that. English gardens, again, if you want that English cottage garden, you got to find the right person. Also important to know what they're going to provide. Like, what are you paying for? Are you just getting the concept, sort of, some pretty pictures that kind of give you an idea, or are you getting the actual final design with plant numbers, plant palette, all of that? I've seen people get, not understand what they're getting for what they're paying for. And so just be really clear and upfront through all of that. And then, do they install also? Is it a design build? Maybe you can save some money if they do the installation after the design. So again, just really understanding what you get for your money. Great to be transparent, great to be upfront. I think you'll have a better working relationship with that person. And if you're trying to find a designer, you can check out APLD, Association of Professional Landscape Designers. They have a feature on their website where you can put in your address or your zip code, and they'll pull up all the people that are registered with them. Depending on your project, you might need a landscape architect. They're going to work on slightly different types of projects. If there might be a little more sort of like engineering stuff, if you need like significant grading or terracing, or it's just check out landscape designers and landscape architects, and you just kind of match what you need for your site and your project. They also have that feature where you can find a designer. And then ALCC, the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado, they have Find a Pro. So same kind of thing. And they list designers, irrigation people, lighting people, all kinds of stuff. So there are lots of different resources out there to help you understand design, to get inspiration for design, if you're doing it yourself, and then also if you want some consultation and some help from a professional. Lots of great people out there to help with that. So with that, I thank you all for your time and attention. I hope you got a lot out of this, learned some new things. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is there. I'll do my best to get back to you and answer any questions that you might have. And I wish you all really good luck in your process and moving through the design steps and getting an excellent Xeriscape designed and installed for you to enjoy. That's the goal of all this, is to have something that we enjoy being in and among and a part of and getting to engage with. So thank you so much.